G'day, is Lewis Hamilton going out with Kim Kardashian? That was the question on many people's lips today when F1 resumed with media in the paddock today here in Bahrain. The question came from a female journalist in this form. A lot's been said in the media about the company you were in at the Super Bowl. Is it safe to say you enjoyed the company more than the game? Because I understand it was a pretty ordinary game. Of course, pics of the pair have gone crazy across the internet. That and the Bad Bunny performance actually knocked a bit of wind out of Cadillac's launch, which was via a commercial in that telecast. Back to that question, what did Lewis say? I don't comment on those sorts of things. It's private life. Although their appearance was anything but private. More than 100 million people saw them. I know that one British journalist and also a German journalist were planning to ask Lewis about it, but once they got wind of his response, they decided not to ask. So how was the first day of testing for Lewis? Well, he wasn't happy with the car, saying it was slippery at some corners and he spun here at turn 1. But there are some changes for Lewis in 2026. He has a new manager. Mark Hines, his old manager, has left to join Cadillac, and his old press officer has gone, and this is her replacement. And for those of you wondering, Angela Cullen is by his side again this year. It was a big day here. Each team had one car and they could either split it between two drivers during the day. For instance, McLaren did that, or like Red Bull, they just had one driver drive for the whole day. And when they change over that driver, they need to change the number on the car. In actual fact, not all the cars have numbers on this part of the car. Certainly less than half have them. On top of that, they need to change the TCAM and the driver's name if it's on the car. A lot of you were keen to get my thoughts on what I thought of the cars when I first saw them. Initially, I noticed that they were smaller, but once I'd seen 4 or 5 laps, it didn't even occur to me that they were smaller. But there was a discernible difference. Noise-wise, I can't say that there was much of a difference. Were they louder? Well, one of my followers actually said, Kim, could you take a sound meter and measure the decibels? So I did. I borrowed one from the Western Hotel. I stood out here at the end of the pit straight, and for an hour I monitored every single car that went past. These were the results. It ranged from 108.4 decibels for Cadillac up to the loudest, which was the Alpine, at 112.4. And those cars are about 7 to 10 metres from me, and the machine automatically spat out the maximum decibels. Is that what you were thinking? One of the team crew told me that when they first heard that car fire up in Barcelona, they thought it was loud. And what is that, about a 4% difference between the loudest and the softest? Is that noticeable? Is that big in terms of sound? Perhaps if you know, you can make some comments below, please. Let's go now to Cadillac. It's the first time I've seen that car, in person obviously, and it was wheeled out for a photo opportunity early in the day with both Sergio and Valtteri, and then Graham, the team principal. I'll go back to that photo shoot in a minute, but I met Graham, I'm not going to say his last name because this is part of the story. I met his wife, Wendy, and his son, Dan. And I said, oh, you must be Mrs. Loudon. She says, well, no, I'm Mrs. Loudon. That's how you pronounce it. And I said, oh, okay, everybody's pronouncing it Loudon. She said, yes, but it's actually Loudon. I mentioned it to Ted Kravitz later, and I said, what do you call him? And he said, Loudon? No, it's Loudon. But he was already invested, as we all are, because we're all calling him Graham Loudon. So I'm now conflicted. What should I do? Should I say it the way he says it, or the way you've probably heard it before? For the sake of this exercise, I'll say Loudon. Some other things about that car that surprised me when it was wheeled out, it had no white rims, because if you go back to the launch and these photos here, I'm thinking, right, it's going to have that white rim. Not the case. And now a number of you, along with me, struggled to work out whether there was actually any chrome on the car from the pictures. Well, there isn't. It's all white paint, and the design on one side is slightly different from the design on the other. A lot of you saying, I thought they had to be exactly the same. Well, I asked the FIA what the story was, and the answer was, livery may not protrude beyond the bodywork of the F1 car and must be substantially similar on both sides of the F1 car. Now, obviously, this is substantially similar. It is slightly different in the colour scheme. And if you have a look closely, there's some intricate design work in that white paint. Have a look at these side mirrors. There are lights in the front, and they were actually running today on track. So I went up to the FIA again, and I said, why are those lights there? This is the first time. Well, the answer is when it's wet weather, like rain, fog, whatever, and a car spins, there's no lights that can be seen by the oncoming drivers. This is a way to get around that. And they've been testing it for, I think, well, I know actually, of Barcelona testing they used it, and today they were running it on track for some, if not all, of the day. Now you know. And one final thing about the Cadillac, this one here got me. Best enjoyed responsibly. Now, typically I would see that with some alcohol brand nearby and normally small underneath it. And I'm looking around here, there's a TWG logo, there's a GM, Claro above it. That's a sponsor of Checo's, and they're not alcohol, they're communications. So I had a chat with the guys at Cadillac and they said, well, look, we can't advertise alcohol here in Bahrain. So rather than leave it blank, they've just made the best enjoyed responsibly logo much bigger. Causes me to look into what's happening, and now I'm telling you. And what's the alcohol? Jim Beam, I think, isn't it? Jim Beam it is, official partner of the Cadillac Formula One team. Now, come with me to pit lane, because I did that session late in the afternoon, well, it was actually evening, and I was blown away by this. The gantry above the pit box for Audi is lit. This is brand new. Nobody has ever had that. And they had it on tonight, and it looks spectacular. Audi's team photographer said not only is it great for lighting cars, if they do product shoots at night, it's a beautiful softbox. But I'm not sure whether it will be turned on during day races. And I wasn't out there during the day to tell you, but I love what it did for the look of the cars and the pit stops under lights. And perhaps something even more impressive was this signage here at Williams. This is lowered every time the car sits in the garage with the driver in the seat, because the driver looks at the data screens, or data if you're American, behind it. But there's a plug for Williams, some fun stuff, a bit like the Sphere in Vegas, and of course an ad for one of their sponsors. A couple more differences between cars, and Ferrari stood out here with this jagged edge at the back of their car. I've not seen that before, and I'm not sure if it provides any aerodynamic advantage, but it was noticeably different from the rest. And pretty much every team's bizzo on the outside of the front wing here is different. I imagine one of them is better than all the others, but who knows which one. But there's certainly plenty of variety. And if you're an aerodynamicist, you might be able to work out why one might be better than the other. Let's talk about flights into Bahrain. Things were thrown into turmoil on, Monday night, when very thick fog closed the airport. Nico Hulkenberg and Liam Lawson were waylaid in Doha. They had a 7 or 8 hour layover. I know that Liam actually got a bed in the in-room hotel, was very lucky to get one of the last remaining ones. James Vowles also had his flight disrupted. Carlos Sainz was very fortunate. He arrived in a private jet just after my Gulf Air flight landed, and I think our 2 flights might have been the last to get in before the airport was closed. It normally closes at 3 a.m, but this was at 11:30, and no flights were allowed in for some time thereafter. Still on the subject of Carlos Sainz, he has a new trainer. You might remember he had Rupert Mannering, and then he had Pierluigi Della Bona for a couple of years, and now he has Borja Pressol. And where's Gigi gone? Well, he's looking after Oliver Behrman. Last year in Bahrain, we had the group drivers shot in the big dome. We were allowed in to watch and take some pictures from the side. But this year, we weren't allowed in. We had to stay outside. It was done in the F2 garages, which is behind the paddock at Bahrain. And while the drivers all walked across and we got plenty of photos there, we weren't allowed inside there, although we did get this sneak peek through a window. Lasted about 10 to 12 minutes, and I guess we'll see the result of that at some point. But they are sitting or standing on these metal cubes. Max Verstappen has a new number 3. Oh, actually, going back to the numbers on the cars, the few cars that do have them, I'm not sure I like these numbers that are on the Red Bull cars. It just seems to be very much out of whack with the rest of the design. What are your thoughts? Because a couple of the crew that I spoke to from Red Bull said that they don't like it one bit. I guess it's hard to please everybody, but there was one fella today who was very pleased to be back in the paddock, and that is this man, Australian driver Jack Doohan. You'll know that Jack started last season with Alpine, did 6 races, and then was moved aside for Franco Colapinto. Well, he's landed this reserve driver gig at Haas. He's there for the first 3 days at least. And it was interesting that Ao Komatsu, who's the team principal of Haas, came out in the media recently and said that Esteban Ocon is under some pressure. Rio Hirakawa is also a reserve driver. But could it be that if Esteban doesn't perform, one of those 2 drivers would step up and take his seat? It's an interesting story, and it's not out of the realms of possibilities. We have another 5 days of testing to go, and it is a good atmosphere. Today, very quiet in the paddock because there were no fans around, but on Thursday and Friday, depending on when you're watching this, and the following Thursday and Friday, there will be fans allowed into the track, and I gather some of them will make it their way into the paddock. I thoroughly enjoyed being back in the paddock after some 10 weeks away from it, looking at the cars. Did I have a favourite look? No, nothing really stood out, but of course, as time goes by, there may be a car or 2 that become my favourites. Now, before you leave, can I ask you one favour? Could you please become a subscriber for the 50% of you who aren't subscribed? And if you've enjoyed this video, a click on the like button will be most appreciated. And for a whole lot of extra content, feast your eyes on this here. My sincere thanks to you for watching. And finally, stay passionate. Right, continue on, Kim, continue on. How's the audio? Looking good?